Welcome to another episode of Conscious Chronicles. I'm your host, and today we're embarking on a profound journey into the realms of human experience that lie just beyond our everyday perception. We'll be exploring a deeply moving account of a near-death experience that occurred during a childhood surgery. This story will challenge our understanding of life, death, and the very nature of consciousness itself. Before we dive in, I'd like to remind you that if you find value in these explorations of consciousness, please consider supporting our channel by hitting the thumbs up button, subscribing, and clicking the bell icon to be notified of new content. Your support is crucial in helping us continue to bring these transformative stories to light. Now let's begin our journey. Our story begins in the mid-1950s, a time when medical procedures were far less sophisticated than they are today, especially when it came to preparing young patients for surgery. Our protagonist, a 5-year-old girl, was about to undergo a routine operation of a tonsillectomy and an adenoidectomy. However, what should have been a straightforward medical procedure turned into a life-altering spiritual experience. Imagine, if you will, the world through the eyes of a 5-year-old. Everything is new, exciting, and sometimes a little scary. Now picture this child being told she needs to go to the hospital to have her tonsils removed. No further explanation is given. No attempt is made to allay her fears or prepare her for what's to come. This lack of communication, while common for the time, set the stage for a traumatic experience that would have far-reaching consequences. As the hospital staff came to take her to the operating room, our young protagonist suddenly realized the gravity of what was about to happen. The casual words of an adult, perhaps meant to be reassuring, revealed a terrifying truth. She was going to be put to sleep, and parts of her body were going to be cut out. Worse still, her mother, her anchor in this strange and frightening place, would not be allowed to accompany her. Can you imagine the terror coursing through this child's veins? The betrayal she must have felt. In her young mind, this must have seemed like the ultimate abandonment. Her reaction was visceral and immediate. She began to scream, her voice echoing through the sterile hospital corridors as she was wheeled towards the operating room. Even the familiar face of her doctor, waiting at the OR doors, couldn't calm her frantic state. The medical staff, likely feeling pressured and perhaps a bit overwhelmed by her hysteria, made a fateful decision. "Let's go ahead and get her under as quickly as possible," they said, setting in motion a chain of events that would leave an indelible mark on this young girl's psyche. Picture the scene in the operating room. The bright, harsh lights, the cold metallic surfaces, the masked faces of strangers looming overhead. For an adult, this would be intimidating. For a child, it must have been absolutely terrifying. Our young protagonist was transferred to the operating table, her small body held down as she was strapped in place. Unable to move, she continued to scream, her voice raw with fear and desperation. She struggled against her restraints, fighting with all the strength her 5-year-old body could muster. The staff moved quickly. A cloth was placed over her eyes, blocking out the glaring surgical light. Then came the mask covering her nose and mouth. She was told to breathe deeply, to let herself drift off to sleep. But in her panicked state, convinced that she would never wake up again, She tried to hold her breath. It was a futile effort. Her screams had ensured that she was breathing heavily, and the ether quickly took effect. In a matter of seconds, consciousness slipped away from her. In her young mind, this wasn't sleep. It was death. But then, something extraordinary happened. Almost as quickly as consciousness had faded, it returned, but in a form entirely different from anything our young protagonist had ever experienced before. She found herself floating upwards, rising from the operating table. She passed by the people gathered around her body, drifting towards the bright surgical light she had seen moments before. The fear and panic that had gripped her so tightly mere seconds ago melted away, replaced by a deep sense of relief, joy, and peace. She wasn't dead after all. In her state of elation, she didn't even question the fact that she was floating. It seemed the most natural thing in the world. She rose past the light, up to the ceiling of the operating room where she paused. Then, curious about what was happening below, she turned in midair to look down. What she saw was extraordinary. The entire operating room was laid out before her like a living 3D model. She could see the operating table, her own body lying still upon it, and the movements of the medical staff as they went about their work. It was a strange sight, to be sure, but it didn't frighten her. Somehow, she understood that the body on the table was hers, but it no longer felt like an essential part of her. The real her was here, floating above it all, free from fear and pain. Having satisfied her curiosity about what was happening in the operating room, our young explorer turned away once more. To her amazement, she found herself floating up through the ceiling of the hospital. Suddenly, she was outside, hovering above the building. From this vantage point, she could see everything. The roof of the hospital spread out below her, its shape clear and distinct. She could see the parking lot surrounding the building, the trees that dotted the landscape. She had never seen this view before now. After all, she'd only been in this hospital once, and that was on the day of her birth. Yet here it all was, laid out before her in perfect detail. As she began to float upwards once more, she felt a sense of freedom and joy unlike anything she had ever experienced. The fear and pain of the operating room seemed like a distant memory. Here, in this strange in-between place, she felt safe, content, and utterly at peace. But her journey was not to continue uninterrupted. As she reached a point about 30 or 40 feet above the hospital roof, she found herself suddenly stopped in mid-air. The cause of this abrupt halt soon became clear. There was someone else here with her. The being appeared to be male, dressed in a long white robe that seemed to glow with its own inner light. He floated just off and behind her right shoulder, his presence comforting rather than frightening. Despite the strangeness of the situation, our young protagonist felt no fear. Something about this being radiated peace and safety. The celestial guide spoke to her, his voice kind and reassuring. He explained that she couldn't go any further this time, and that he was there to help her, that he had always been with her. He went on to reassure her about what was happening back in the operating room, explaining that the doctors and nurses were trying to help her, not harm her. They weren't going to kill her or do anything bad to her. His words washed over her like a soothing balm, easing any lingering fears or doubts. When he asked if she understood and was okay, with what he had told her, she found herself agreeing without hesitation. Everything he said made perfect sense to her, even though it was so far removed from her normal experiences. What happened next is shrouded in the mists of her memory. She believes that the celestial being shared with her glimpses of her future, outlining some of the events that would shape her life in the years to come. While the specifics of these prophecies have faded from her conscious mind, one statement remains crystal clear. She remembers him saying to her, "Just remember, no matter what happens, you will always be okay." These words, spoken with such certainty and compassion, would become a touchstone for her in the years to come. Even when she couldn't consciously remember this experience, the reassurance contained in that simple phrase would echo through her life, providing comfort and strength in times of trouble. After this mysterious conversation, the celestial guide asked our young protagonist if she was ready to return to her body so that the surgery could be completed. Feeling safe and reassured, she agreed. The being took her by the hand, and together they descended through the roof of the building back into the operating room. They hovered for a moment above the surgical light, providing a unique vantage point from which to observe the proceedings below. The celestial guide took this opportunity to explain the tonsillectomy and adenoidectomy procedures to her. From this elevated position, she could see everything that was being done, even noting the specific instruments being used to remove her tonsils. It's worth pausing here to consider the significance of this moment. A 5-year-old child with no medical knowledge or training was able to observe and later recall specific details of a surgical procedure. This level of detail, corroborated years later by watching a similar surgery on television, lends a compelling authenticity to her experience. As their time together drew to a close, the celestial guide asked our young friend if it was okay for him to leave and for her to return to her body. Feeling calm and reassured, she agreed. In that same instant, consciousness faded once more. The next thing she knew, she was waking up in her hospital bed. Her mother was there, along with a nurse. To everyone's surprise, she was neither afraid nor upset. The terror that had gripped her before the surgery had vanished completely. Instead, she was happy to play with the new doll that had been given to her as a surprise. Perhaps the most intriguing aspect of this story is what happened next. Or rather, what didn't happen. Our protagonist didn't remember her out-of-body experience. The memory of floating above the operating table, of meeting the celestial guide, of seeing the hospital from above, all of it vanished from her conscious mind. For more than 35 years, this extraordinary experience lay dormant in the recesses of her memory. She went about her life, growing up, facing challenges, experiencing joys and sorrows, all without any conscious recollection of her childhood journey beyond the veil. Yet, even though she couldn't remember the experience itself, its effects lingered. Whenever she faced a life challenge, she would hear a voice in her head, repeating the reassuring words, "It will all be okay. It will all be okay." The source of this comforting mantra remained a mystery to her, but its presence was a constant source of strength and reassurance. It wasn't until more than 3.5 decades later that the memory of her extraordinary experience came flooding back. The trigger was unexpected. She and her daughter were watching a tonsillectomy being performed on the surgery channel. As she watched the procedure unfold on the screen, filmed from an angle directly above the child patient, something stirred in her memory. The instruments being used, the way the procedure was being carried out, it all seemed hauntingly familiar. And then in a rush of revelation, the memories came flooding back. Her own tonsillectomy, the terror she had felt, the out-of-body experience, the celestial guide. All of it returned to her consciousness in vivid detail. The shock of this sudden recall was profound. Hours were spent processing these newly recovered memories, trying to make sense of an experience that defied conventional explanation. While she still couldn't remember the specifics of what the celestial being had told her about her future, she finally understood the source of that comforting voice that had been with her throughout her entire life. As we come to the end of this extraordinary tale, it's natural to wonder about its implications. What does this experience tell us about the nature of consciousness? About the relationship between mind and body? About what lies beyond the veil of death? These are profound questions, and while this single account doesn't provide definitive answers, it certainly gives us much to ponder. The level of detail recalled, the consistency of the experience with other reported near-death experiences, and the lasting impact it had on our protagonist's life all lend weight to its authenticity. Perhaps the most powerful aspect of this story is the message of hope and reassurance it conveys. Just remember, no matter what happens, you will always be okay. These words, spoken by a celestial being to a frightened 5-year-old girl, carry a universal truth that can comfort us all. Life can be challenging. We all face moments of fear, uncertainty, and pain. But perhaps, like our protagonist, we too have a celestial guide watching over us, reminding us that no matter what happens, we will be okay. As we close this episode of Conscious Chronicles, I invite you to reflect on your own experiences. Have you ever had a moment where you felt a presence guiding or reassuring you? Have you ever received a message of hope that stayed with you throughout your life? Please, share your thoughts in the comments below. Let's continue this exploration. And if you found value in today's story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell. Your support helps us continue to bring these transformative stories to light. Until next time, this is Conscious Chronicles, reminding you that there's more to our world than meets the eye. Stay curious, stay open, and remember, no matter what happens, you will always be okay.